Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey donates $10 million to the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. The sub-headline being, the social media giant CEO and co-founder donated $10 million to a Boston University research center founded by Ibram X. Kendi to combat racism. Note, this is not to combat racism. That's what Kendi wants you to think. That's what, I don't know if Jack actually thinks that or not. This is basically amounts to a don't hurt me payment from Jack. This is the same thing. He needs to look woke so that no one comes after Twitter at some level. Maybe he believes it at this point. It kind of doesn't matter. But no, despite what the headline says, this is not to combat racism. What it is, quite explicitly, this new institute at Boston University is to promote anti-racism. And as we talked about in episode 39 at some length, this is Kendi's rhetorical trap. He's created a binary, which is a false one, in which he said, if you are not anti-racist, and I, Kendi, get to define anti-racist, then you are racist. Everything that is not anti-racist with my special definition is racist. And if you don't quite know this, then you can mistake promoting anti-racism for combating racism, right? Those words, those things sound like they're the same thing, but they're not. And if you think they are, as presumably the authors of that NBC article believe, then you've fallen prey to this rhetorical trap of Kendi's. So no, once again, you should be opposed to racism, obviously, and you should be opposed to anti-racism, which no, is not in fact a racist position.
If you demand equality of outcome, then the person who profits most is the person who invests least. So you're basically setting up a system of freeloading that has no mechanism for policing. And so anyway, the whole thing is so obviously wrong at such a simple level that nobody as smart as Jack Dorsey could possibly believe it. But here's the thing that I get from this Dorsey bit. You point out this is a small amount of money to him. Mm-hmm. It is a huge amount of money in an academic context.
And to the vast majority of us.
Right. And the point, though, is it follows the exact same pattern as what people are now doing in much more mundane ways 1,000 times a day in every institution in the Western world, which is they are solving their own problem by making a gesture that is then empowering the movement that then comes after the next person so that they will solve their own problem and make a gesture. So the point is, look, I hate to say it, right? It's very easy for those of us who don't have the kind of money that Jack Dorsey does to misunderstand what it would be like to be in his shoes. But in this case, I have to say, Jack Dorsey has enough money that he can set himself up for life. He can insulate himself completely from people showing up in his neighborhood. Frankly, he can move wherever he wants in the world and be safe by virtue of the kinds of things that kind of resource will buy. For him to externalize harm on others, for him to empower a movement that is threatening other people by giving them a token amount of money for him and a huge sum for them, he basically just hurt the rest of us by creating a huge amount of pseudo-legitimacy. So what I've called idea laundering, an institute at BU that's studying anti-racism for the point of view, for the purpose of generating policy and writing narratives. This is nonsense. And Jack, you just threw a whole bunch of gasoline on that fire, presumably to solve your own problem. And it's absolutely unacceptable.
I'm reminded of the famous, I want to know how to pronounce his name, Martin Niemöller. Do you know how to pronounce this guy's name? First, they came for the socialists quotation. So let me just read it first and then say what I hear you saying as the modern update, which is just horrifying. So he wrote, no, I'll just read it. You can show it, sure. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Well, the update that you were suggesting, that Jack Dorsey, everyone from Jack Dorsey to the people with BLM signs on their lawn who put it up for fear that they would be the people who would next see the lights shined in their windows and be told to get on the streets or else they aren't part of the right side here. First, they came for the socialists, and not only did I not speak out, I explained to them why the socialists were wrong. Then they came for the trade unionists, and not only did I not speak out, but I explained to them why the trade unionists were wrong. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, and I also explained to them why the Jews were wrong. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. It's not quite right, but there's some horrifying update to his comment from the Holocaust that people are engaging in now that is even worse than just being silent. It is people actually offloading the well-being of their neighbors and the rest of society in order to protect themselves for a very brief moment.
Yeah, it's a increase. Instead of your cowardice leaving others vulnerable, it's whatever the active version of cowardice is, where you're bending over backwards to make life easy for the people wielding the threat. Yeah. You are in effect increasing the power of that threat against the next people in line. And I have to say, I see an awful lot of cowardice at the very top. The people who can afford best not to be cowards are in fact most reliable in this respect, that they are the most likely to bend over backwards. And I think it's some perverse version of, because they have a huge amount stored up, they're calculating how much they would lose rather than how safe they actually are. I mean, if you can buy your own security force, you can put your house, on a hill and surround it with guards and whatever else you're doing, you're in a much better position to say the truth than those of us who can't do that. And some of us are standing up. So what the hell? I mean, seriously, if we can't depend on somebody like Jack Dorsey to say, you know what, that anti-racism stuff you're selling isn't anti-racism. Anti-racism, if that word is to mean anything, would have to be an end to racism. It's not some new racism that counters racism until some, utopian future point.
Well, it's related to the truism that there's sort of a rolling goal that I don't remember if it's from corporate America or from tech billionaire space, but people will say, until you have your first million, you imagine that will be enough, and then you get your first million, and they say, oh, well, now I need 5 million. I can't remember. This sort of emerges from the 80s, maybe in corporate landscapes where people become rich and then realize that rich isn't what they thought it was, and they need more and more and more. And so you don't, maybe even Jack Dorsey doesn't even feel like he's safe, right?
Yeah,
I'm not justifying it.
I get it, but on the other hand, this is an international emergency, and if we can't depend on the smart people of Silicon Valley to figure out that Western civilization is coming apart at the seams, that they have played some role in allowing that to happen, and they have some obligation to the rest of us to put it right, that we are now at each other's throats in the streets of major American cities. People are fleeing those cities. This is insane. And people like Jack Dorsey have an obligation to stand up first, not last.